Cannabis Common Sense, the show that tells the truth about marijuana and the politics behind its prohibition.
Welcome to another exciting edition of Cannabis Common Sense. This week, we're happy to welcome back Chris Bennett, author of many books on the archaeological and religious use of cannabis, including his most recent one, Cannabis, the Lost Sacrament. So stay tuned for our interview with him. We're going to forego our hemp news segment tonight, but let's bring on our infamous dancing cannabis leaves.
I feel the force.
I'd like to welcome good friend and someone I admire, a scholar, an author, Mr. Chris Bennett, to back on Cannabis Common Sense. Chris, what are all the books you have written?
My first book was Green Gold, The Tree of Life, Marijuana, and Magic and Religion. And that came out in 1995. Then Sex, Drugs, Violence in the Bible in 2001. Then Cannabis and the Soma Solution, 2010. And Liber 420, Cannabis, Magical Herbs, and the Occult, 2018. And then most recently, Cannabis, Lost Sacrament of the Ancient World in 2023.
All right, and tell us about your latest book and what the Lost Sacrament, talking about cannabis, I take in Christianity.
Yeah, more like in Judaism. I have a little bit about on Christianity in there, but more in like the ancient Hebrew religion. Now this goes into Sula Bennett's theory, which I've written about before in earlier books, that the Hebrew terms canna and cannabosum identified cannabis. And, there was like a good, strong linguistic argument, but it never seemed like it would get beyond a theory, linguistic theory,
Yes.
that you could prove until 2020, when archaeologists and researchers in Israel released a paper, Cannabis and Frankincense at the ancient Judite shrine of Tel Arad. And there in this Tel Arad shrine, which is the only actually temple site, archaeological remains have been looked at for the ancient Hebrew religion. At this temple site in Tel Arad, Jerusalem, they found an inner chamber, the Holy of Holies, like in the temple at Jerusalem as described in the Bible, about the size of a walk-in closet. And inside this temple area were two altars. One was about 2 foot, one's about 3 foot. And on one altar, they had burned frankincense, and on the other altar, they had burned cannabis resins, and the researchers involved suggested hashish. And so this goes back to the 8th century BCE, and is definitive proof of cannabis use in the ancient Hebrew religion. And the reason this site was preserved so well is it was purposely canceled. I mean, it was shut down when religious reforms were going on in about the 8th century BCE, and was buried. They went in there, they knocked over the altars, they buried it under sand, they put a new floor on top, and this preserved the archaeological remnants of cannabis resins and stuff like that very well. And this coincides with the stories of cannabosum and canna in the Old Testament. Initially, the initial references of cannabosum are quite positive. In Exodus, it's used as a holy anointing oil. But in later, the final reference in Jeremiah 6:20, it is condemned. It's God says, I don't want your frankincense. I don't want your canna. They don't please me. And this correlates to this very site here. And so this is archaeological evidence that confirms the identification of canna with the frankincense, just as described in Jeremiah 6:20 and in Isaiah and other verses as well.
Right. So it seems that that particular method of consumption, going into a small space and communing with friends or the supernatural, was like one of the most common ways to consume cannabis. When you look at Herodotus, the
Yeah.
oldest Western uh, historian, I know you've covered this many times in your
Yeah,
writings,
yeah. Well,
but
he described the Scythians' vapor bath, which they performed after funerary rites. They put brazen stones inside a teepee-like structure and then throw cannabis flowers on that and inhale the fumes. Same sort of similar idea, small enclosed place to hold the fumes in. Whereas the Scythian ritual is more of a communal thing. The Hebrew counterpart here in Telerad was more of an oracle site. So it would have been an individual going inside this area, and smoke filled thing and waiting until some answers came back to the pleas.
yeah. And it seemed that that was common in other cultures as well, that hot box kind of methodology.
Yeah, in like Assyrian, Babylonian, Akkadian cultures. And we know also of archaeological evidence up from in China, from Indo-European cultures there, the Gushi culture and others, that were practicing rites similar to the Scythian rites in funerary rituals. We have multiple sites of archaeological evidence of preserved cannabis flowers and the braziers used for burning them, and the remnants of the cannabis in the braziers. I would say probably drinking and ingesting cannabis though was more common throughout the ancient world, particularly in India. I've written before about the Vedic soma and Avesta and Heoma, which I believe were originally cannabis preparations, and there's a lot of good evidence for that as well, archaeological evidence and stuff. So they're not just burnt by everybody, but prepared in drinks and topical ointments, ingested foods, and other things is what's indicated throughout the text.
So, do you have any other books in the works?
I haven't really been working on anything, just been kind of like doing a bit of surfing and enjoying life. I kind of got a little bit disillusioned with the world and decided to kind of back off a bit.
Yeah, you moved from Vancouver area out to the total opposite side, 4 hours difference in terms of
Yeah.
your
Other end of the country, from one end of the country right to the other end of the country.
yeah, coast to coast. I've seen pictures of the house that you've been remodeling. It looks pretty
Yeah,
fantastic.
no, yeah, it's a beautiful place, and property here is like a quarter of what it is in Vancouver, right?
Yeah, well, that's a big incentive, isn't it?
Yeah,
Yeah, we have huge rents here in the Northwest as well. Well, it's basically the same ecological area,
yeah.
but so I've had a couple of guests call me recently, and they've asked me, "Can you repeat the show with Chris Bennett?" And I said, "Well, let's just do another show with Chris Bennett. It's been a while, so here we are. If somebody wants to get your books, is Amazon the
Amazon
best place
is
to go?"
easy. You can find it's on online booksellers all over the place, and a lot of bookstores can order it for you if they don't have it. Easy to find.
How have the sales been of your books?
Liber 420 did really good. I was kind of been disappointed in Cannabis Lost Sacrament of the Ancient World, but I kind of burned bridges with some people. I to be honest with you, I think a lot of the books written on psychedelic history, mushrooms and Christianity, and other things have been far-fetched, and they're not really rooted in solid archaeology and textual evidence. And I don't really want to get grouped into that. I've been trying to focus on getting the attention of biblical scholars and archaeologists, but it's a hard road to travel when you're not a member of those academic cliques, and so with limited success and stuff. But yeah, I just I could be better for sure.
Yeah. Well, maybe we can sell a few copies here. Just go to Amazon, folks, and look for Cannabis, The Lost Sacrament by Chris Bennett. There's another cannabis scholar that kind of preceded you that it almost seems like they're part of your family because they share your last name, even though I understand you're not related. You want to talk about how the apparent misinterpretation of the word cannabis was interpreted to be calamus,
That's
right?
right. Yeah.
And
So this is like here. I'll show you who she is in just a second here. I actually dedicated my book to Sula Bennett, who you're mentioning here. This is Cannabis Lost Sacrament. This is the altar that had cannabis resins on it, found at Tel Arad. And so this is Sula Bennett. And in 1936, she first wrote about her theory that the Hebrew term kana and also cannabosum, a combined word, identified cannabis in 5 places in the Old Testament. Or the references that Sula Bennett referred to are Exodus 30:23, and this is where it was prepared in a holy anointing oil. And this time here, in this particular reference, cannabosum is used, which means fragrant cane. And that's what the term canna means. It has a dual meaning, according to Sula Bennett, both reed, cane, and cannabis in some cases. Kind of like how we use grass or herb, you know. And then there's a reference in Song of Solomon 4:14, where it appears in the love poem of Solomon. And in Isaiah 43:24, God gets mad at Isaiah for not bringing canna and frankincense, but burdening him with his sins. You know, so it was a clear desire of God to have it. In Ezekiel 27:17, it's described as canna from coming in on a caravan. And in Jeremiah 6:20, it's condemned alongside frankincense as coming from a foreign land. So Ezekiel and Jeremiah identify it as coming from a foreign land. Now, this is interesting because the Tel Arad cannabis, they're saying it wasn't actually produced in ancient Israel. It was an item of trade that arrived at Tel Arad. There's no evidence of cannabis cultivation in the region. In the soil, no pollen in the soil and the different levels of strata and whatnot. So that coincides with that there. And the Song of Solomon reference is interesting because many scholars have seen this particular reference as a love poem to Yahweh and Asherah, an ancient goddess that was coupled with the biblical God prior to the writing of the Bible. The Old Testament texts, the Torah and the Tanakh, or whatever you want to call it, the Hebrew Bible, they are not thought to have really been started to be put into any sort of form of composition until at least the 5th century BCE. So this is a few centuries after it, and this is taking place in the time of what would be Kings and Chronicles in the Old Testament, when the 2 bickering kingdoms of Israel and Judah were often fighting, actually, instead of a combined kingdom. So this is like the history before monotheism, when the Hebrews were practicing polytheism, the worship of multiple gods, with the head Yahweh and his counterpart Asherah at the head of the pantheon. And we know that that this was the case because of all sorts of archaeological evidence of cannabis use in ancient, of references to both Yahweh and his Asherah in inscriptions and other things throughout ancient Israel. So, it's clear that she was worshipped alongside him. And in the biblical account there in Jeremiah, his condemnations of the use of this, it coincides with condemnations to burning incense to the Queen of Heaven. And he blames the fall of Jerusalem on the Hebrews' continual worship of the Queen of Heaven and burning incense to them. In Jeremiah 44, it's pretty clear that that's what he's talking about. Whereas the people he's talking to say, well, when we worshipped Asherah, we also worshipped Yahweh, and we did well. That was when we were having a really bountiful kingdom. Now we stopped worshiping her. That's when it's all fallen apart.
I see. Let me point you to this reference. I don't know if you have a King James Bible handy.
Not hand.
I don't think I've ever said that on this show before. Uh, and this is episode 1185 now. I think you first came on like 12 years ago when you came down and visited, I believe, maybe before. But anyway, the reference I'm going to give you is Isaiah 18:5. And Isaiah 18:5 says in the King James Version, for the harvest, when the bud is perfect and the sour grape is ripening in the flower, he shall both cut off the sprigs with pruning hooks and take down and cut the branches. And they shall be left together until the fowls of the mountains and the beasts of the earth. Anyway, it goes on to say that they should take it and put it into a hot heat, and that the fumes are apparently. I don't have that one right here.
Yeah. I'm not familiar with that verse right off the bat. What was that? I'll take a look here. Isaiah
18:5. We're going to have our Bible study now, folks. A first for Cannabis Common Sense, but my wife just happened to come upon this and was moved by it.
Yeah, stuff like that, it's interesting, but it's not like got the foundation of something like the linguistic argument. God, you can interpret every verse. Everybody could interpret things all different ways. You know what I mean? And
but the full term, the bud is perfect and the sour grape is ripening in the flower. Well,
I'd have to go. You got to go back to the ancient Hebrew because I'd have to go back and then take a look at each particular word, the context. There's a lot. You got to look at everything on either side of that. And there's a lot. You just can't go by like an English verse like that.
Right.
That's not how these things work. Like when I'm discussing like any of these references that Sula Bennett's gone, I've gone back into the Hebrew myself and taken a look and verified, got the various translations and compared them and that sort of thing. So it's kind of got more of a foundation because of that. And then now because of these references being so connected to frankincense in Isaiah, he's specifically talking about cannabis and frankincense. In Jeremiah, he's specifically talking about cannabis and frankincense, and how that fits with the identification at Tel Arad, right, where they have this hashish that's been imported, so it's being accused of coming from a foreign land in Jeremiah and Ezekiel, and it's with frankincense as it appears in the Song of Songs, in Isaiah, and in Jeremiah specifically. That gives it a lot of strength into its connection, right? And then the context of it. The temple in Tel Arad was canceled, believed to be in the time of Hezekiah. And that's when all these reforms were going on, when they were going around and removing the Asherah. They're described going into the temple in Jerusalem, removing the Asherah from there, as well as the brazen serpent that Moses made because the people of Israel were burning incense to it. That was pulled out. So they're going through these many reforms, describing going to the high places, which the Tel Arad was one of these high places as well, and destroying those and knocking over the altars. All this is quite clearly described in the Bible, and Tel Arad is proof of these reforms. And it's that the identification of cannabis at Tel Arad connects it with Cana, which was also part of these reforms, as we can see in Jeremiah 6:20. And the reforms were all basically removing all other gods and goddesses from the pantheon in order to instill monotheism. And this was as much a political motivated move as a religious one, because, when you're trying to rule a kingdom and you have all these fragmented deities and different people supporting different little gods and goddesses, it's hard to come to a unified thing. And so what they did is they wanted to, and they were like there was reason they wanted to unify. They were under attack by much larger kingdoms, particularly Assyria at this time. And they wanted to unify the kingdom and unify worship and unify wealth, because all the offerings were going all over the place. They wanted it all to go to Jerusalem, one main temple. This is what the God says, and this is the only God that says anything. And so this was the drive behind these reforms that led to the suppression of Asherah and Cana and various other aspects of what was a polytheistic religion of the Hebrews.
I see. So in terms of that, and do you think cannabis was used at any point in the Christian religion? I know iconography.
So I've written about this extensively, and I do have a chapter on this in the book. In Exodus 30:23, God commands Moses to make this holy anointing oil with myrrh, cinnamon, cassia, take about 6 pounds of cannabis, roughly a bit based on the shekel. It depends how much you people. There's different suggestions on the weight of a shekel, but somewhere between 6 and 9 pounds of cannabis put into roughly 1.5 gallons of olive oil with these other ingredients. And this was a topical anointing oil, which was to anoint the representative of God on earth for the people. And the one who received this anointing oil, the anointed one, in Hebrew, this term was Messiah. And when they translated the Hebrew into the Greek, this became Christ, And we should probably go back over, you'd mentioned earlier about the situation with Cannabis. So the view of Sula Bennett is that when the Hebrew texts were being translated into the Greek for the Septuagint, that there was a mistranslation that took place, and calamus was used to translate cannabosum, but that's an incorrect translation. And that this mistranslation followed through later into the King James and other texts. Some modern Bibles use king, and that's actually more accurate, And I should point out that although Sula Bennett didn't mention it when I was researching, I came across an earlier researcher in the 1850s who suggested canna was an actual term for cannabis with the Phoenicians, who also used cannabis. They were one of the peoples that surrounded the Hebrews, and they found evidence of cannabis on a Phoenician worship. They found little bits of cannabis stalks and stuff that they believed was being either used as an incense or used in delectables or something like that. So we know that they did have cannabis, and that this term became a name for cannabis, canna. And that fits with what Sula Bennett says as well. And it also fits with words that cannabis traveled with. The Indo-European root word for cannabis is canna. And they were in trade with other groups, Scythians and stuff, and Persians and other groups that use this particular term. So there's a good, strong reason how this, when the herb came into to the Israelites, it came with that name and its ritual use. Now, there may have been some inherent earlier use of this same term for reed or something like that, and it may be like it was used generically sometimes, kind of like I said before, with grass and herb. But even the Greek cannabis, people say, oh, well, the Greeks adopted the name from the Scythians. But this is because the first reference to cannabis in Greek literature occurs in Herodotus's account of the Scythians. But that's not necessarily where the word originated. And we see the same kind of breakdown in the Greek word. Canna in Greek means reed, and bis means two. And so it's thought that it may have meant, the reed of two types, And in a book on cannabis and in the ancient and Greek world, written by Andrew Sumler, he suggests that that's exactly it. That it means two, and they identified a fiber used for cannabis, but they also acknowledged a drug ritual use for cannabis as well. And so this identifies the reason for the two in that.
Well, let's go back a little bit. I first encountered you there in Vancouver working with Hemp PC, and
we knew each other before that. I met you. We came into contact in the early 90s, when you were doing hemp paper and stuff like that. I had a business out, Mama Indica's Hemp Seed Treats, in like 91, 92.
That was the first hemp food,
Yeah,
really, Mama
hemp
India.
seed food product out there. And that's when we came into contact. I'd get like paper, I'd make paper pads out of the paper I'd get from you, and other products, hemp seeds probably from you as well. I can't remember. I got it from a variety of sources.
Sorry, I had forgotten that, but now you definitely brought it back. But I clearly remember those tasty little
Hemp
Mama India's
snacks.
seedy sweets. Were they seedy sweeties? Was that?
That was something that came out after, but yeah, after I started making hemp seed bars, a lot of other activists and stuff
Oh yeah,
followed.
people came with similar stuff. But you definitely pioneered that. How did you come upon creating hemp seeds, and what drew you to cannabis and activism initially?
Well, I, found out about Jack Herer's book, the Emperor Wears No Clothes, right? And so I knew about the nutritional value of hemp seed. And so, I was going around to universities and colleges and promoting the use of hemp. And, I had a little piece of hemp cloth and a little piece of hemp paper that I'd pass around and stuff. All that stuff was so rare back then. And I was looking for ways to pay for photocopying and things. And so I came up with like sesame snaps. And I thought I'll make kind of like a hemp seed sesame snap with some other nuts and stuff. And we came up with the Mama Indica's hemp seed treats.
I see. I see. So, what year did you first find out about Jack Harris?
This was about 1990, I guess, 89, 90. And I guess I've told this story many times. I've probably told to you before, but I had a religious experience in the winter of 89, 90 after I found out about Jack's book and the many industrial applications of hemp and stuff. And at that time in Canada, you couldn't have head shops, anything like High Times. It was illegal. It was illegal to sell bongs and things, so it was all kind of, if you got caught promoting it, you were actually subject to like $100,000 fine or something outrageous. And so I, at great risk, got a box of Jack Herer's books into Canada and stuff, and was really pursuing it. But around that time, the Gulf War started in Iraq, and one night I was in a fish plant reading the newspaper, and I saw an ad for a sermon by Pat Robertson, Revelations 18, the fall of Babylon, and behind him he had picture tags of jets, and he was tying in the Gulf War with the book of Revelation. And I'd seen that Saddam was being compared to Nebuchadnezzar, the last king of Babylon, and he'd fired the Scud missile into Israel. So I was like, oh, wow, I'm going to read the book of Revelation right now. And I read it, and in the beginning of the book, John, he eats a scroll, it turns, tastes sweet in his mouth, but he swallows it, turns bitter in his stomach, and then he prophesizes. And this is the book of Revelation, how it starts. So he ingested something to have his vision of Revelation according to the book of Revelation. Similar account happens in Ezekiel as well. And when I was reading it, they're dressed in sackcloth and they're given much incense to offer with billowing clouds of smoke, and the smoke held the prayers of the saints. And I'm going, well, this is really trippy. And I got to the end of the Bible and I read the last verse, Revelations 22. On either side of the river of life stood the tree of life, bearing 12 manners of fruit, yielding its fruit each month, and the leaves of the tree are for the healing of the nations. And when I read that, I felt I had a very powerful religious experience where light just kind of poured into my body, and it was like, this is cannabis and it's multiple uses and it can save the planet, and I was like, oh, whoa, man, and I was tripping out, and I called my wife up at the time. She thought I was having some kind of breakdown. And then the next day I was like, was there anything to that, or was I just tripping, And I started to think, well, if there was, then somebody somewhere will have, recorded something about its religious use. And so I started collecting data on that. And this led to my 5 books that I've written over the last 30 years. And indeed, they were using cannabis just like that, as we can see now from Telerad. So, it's pretty clear that that cannabis, and it's not just like the Hebrew religion, Zoroastrian religion as well. There's references to banga, which is a name for cannabis, and cannabis-infused wines for similar revelations. And a lot of the Christian stuff actually is more influenced by Zoroastrian cosmology than by Hebrew and Jewish cosmology. Things like heaven and hell are adapted from the Zoroastrian religion, the concept of the end of time. first apocalyptic vision was Vishtaspa, a king initiated by Zoroaster with a cannabis-infused wine, who had a vision of the end of the world. And it's thought to be an inspiration for the book of Revelation that existed at the time of its composition, and inspired by cannabis, you know. You can see it in the Assyrian and Babylonian religion. It was quite clearly used in the temple incenses. And its use was particularly associated with a variety of goddesses. I mentioned Ashra, and it was actually Robert Graves, the poet and the historian, who first suggested that cannabis was being used by the cult of Ashra, and he was quite correct. It turns out through this evidence of Telerad, because besides this evidence of cannabis and frankincense, Telerad itself is thought to be a site that identifies the combined worship of Yahweh and Ashra. That's why there was two altars inside this temple. One was for Yahweh and one was for his partner Ashra. And they found inscriptions in Telerad that referred to it as a house of Yahweh. And they found also little temple statues of Ashra in this site as well. So it's further evidence of this combined worship, right? But not just Ashra. Ishtar is also connected with cannabis. Cannabis was burnt to her. There was a cannabis beer that was used for her. Large offerings of cannabis were brought to the temple of Inanna. And the Hittite goddess as well, Ishra. An ancient inscription says the salve of Ishera is cannabis, or Kanabu is the Assyrian Akkadian term used. The salve of Ashera is Kanabu. And Kanabu as well, you know, this term, when you break it down, it's got the root word for reed in it as well. And bu, you know, makes sense, makes reference to, it's believed to be an oil. That's believed that these references to Kanabu actually represent a cannabis oil, kind of a resin product, kind of like what was burnt at Telerad as well. So, it was pretty prevalent, and that's just in the Middle East. It's already by this time, the cultures in China that I was talking about have been using it for a long time period before this, and in India it's already being used by the Vedic culture and stuff like that. And that's why I say it's the sacrament of the ancient world, because it was so widespread and so commonly used as a temple incense or a ritual drink or something like that, that it was indeed probably the most prevalent sacramental substance of the ancient world.
Yeah, I know when you look at China, where I imported hemp paper and fabric from back in the 80s and 90s, they still use cannabis in their funeral rites in terms of wearing hemp clothing,
Yep.
white hemp clothing in the morning, and then burning hemp paper items to send to people in the afterlife. You can look at their ancient tombs, and a lot of the people are buried under a shroud of cannabis flowers. But not only is it, and then in traditional Chinese culture, they had something called the Wufu, the 5 levels of mourning of your patriarchs. And if it was your closest patriarch, your father or grandfather, they required by law, with subject to punishment, that you carry a hemp staff, wear rough hemp clothing and hemp sandals, and a hemp hat for 18 months.
Wow.
And so there were 5 levels. And as you were farther away from that person being your direct father or grandfather, you'd have a shorter period of time you're required to do that. But it wasn't just in ancient China. In traditional Chinese cultures, in Taiwan, Singapore, Indonesia, they still practice the Wufu, and they still wear these hemp shoes, hats, clothing, and it's pretty common there.
Yeah, the
And
Japanese Shinto as well, that goes way back, and
Yeah.
it's still ritually used hemp paper and hemp cloth in the Shinto religion, similar ways to that as well.
Yeah, I was blessed back in 2016 to be invited to go to the International Hemp Environmental Forum in Kyoto. And there I got to meet the head of the Ishi clan that has been cultivating hemp for 1,300 years for the Japanese emperor's family. And a new Japanese emperor was coronated in 2019. And they had on Japanese television the sacred harvest of the hemp at that farm, and then they showed how they boiled it, and then it was carried in a sacred manner to be made into thread, and then to be made into cloth, and then it was used in one of the primary ceremonies of the coronation of a Japanese emperor, the rice ceremony. And those clothes that had been made ritualistically had to be burned after the rice ceremony. But all Shinto temples still have hemp ropes at their temples. And in those gates that you'll see that are orange in color, there's a little lightning-like symbol. Well, that's white hemp cloth. So hemp is integral to Japanese culture. So there are a few hemp growers who supply hemp fiber directly to a company that then supplies the Shinto temples.
Yeah.
But outside of those licensed for Shinto production, the only other one is the family that's been growing it for the Japanese emperor. It was great to meet them there.
Cool.
But I know we've talked briefly about this in the past, and iconography is a little different, but what do you think about the church on the island of Sicily called Montserrat that has several apparent hemp flowers? When Adam consumes an apple, suddenly a hemp leaf appears between.
It's like a palm tree with a big cannabis leaf. Well, it's certainly, it's intriguing, but it's like the mushroom iconography people point to in Christianity as well. Is it a poorly drawn palm tree? Could be. So it's like,
palm tree.
Yeah, it's not solid. It'll always just be debated because you can't prove it, stuff. I prefer stuff like solid linguistic evidence. Cannabis, the root word for cannabis, canna, is of the oldest word stocks we have, Proto-Indo-European. And Indo-European is the mother tongue for French, English, German, Sanskrit, just all sorts of languages. So even before those languages split off, the root word became different languages. There was a root word for cannabis that's common in all these languages, and etymologists and linguists can show this by tracing the histories of these words back, right? So there's, clear references to cannabis in the text in a lot of cases. And something like archaeological evidence is much less disputable, when you find cannabis burnt on a brazier, it's obvious that was burnt there. It's like they've tested the chemical analysis and stuff like that. So it's definitive proof. And imagery like that, sometimes I'll go into it, but it's speculative, and it'll always be speculative. You can make it less speculative when you have the combination of linguistic or archaeological evidence and corroborative evidence to combine with that. But otherwise, you're just kind of left with this loose speculation. And there's so much solid evidence of cannabis textually in Vedic references and Avestan references and Syrian and Babylonian references and in the references to Canaan and whatnot, that that sort of speculation, is secondary to that information, in my opinion. I've been looking to prove these things, right? I mentioned that my religious experience about the Book of Revelation too. I should point out that I don't believe the Book of Revelation is a book of prophecy. The Book of Revelation was written in the first century Common Era, about the situation then. Babylon was obviously Rome. You couldn't talk about the downfall of Rome and publish it. He'd be punished for sedition and crucified or something. So they used symbolism and the references to the beast. These numbers of biblical scholars have gone over this. There are references to Nero and stuff like that. That's pretty clear. But at the same time, after it was written and after that generation passed, every generation since has had somebody that thinks, oh, this is written about right now. Look at this symbolism, and tied it with their time. And that's happened throughout history up to our present day. And the world didn't end. In 1000 AD, there was a big upheaval in Europe because people thought, the day of the Lord could be 1,000 years. It's 1,000 years now. This is going to be the day of the Lord. And people stopped farming, and they thought the end of the world was going to come. It didn't happen, but it caused upheaval because when you don't farm and stuff for a year, it has repercussions for the following years, and this also led to the Crusades because people were disillusioned. They wanted to go back to the Holy Land and find out what was really going on, but at the same time, it's my view that the collective belief in this apocalyptic scenario is kind of being projected back out on the world, and that can be from an unconscious level and a conscious level. When you have evangelicals that were giving advice to people like George Bush on foreign policy based on the book of Revelation, and this is what you should do in Iraq because it says here in the Bible that blah blah blah, they're trying to force that. Even the reformation of Israel in 1948, going back decades before that, Christians who believed in the apocalyptic scenario described in Revelation thought, Israel's got to come back before the Messiah could come. And so when Israel reformed, it was thought of starting the ticking time clock of this thing. And so these people have been trying to bring about the complete reformation of Israel. That's why there's all this Christian Zionist support for Trump to move the embassy into Jerusalem, because these people actually believe that this has got to fulfill prophecy and bring back the Messiah, So although it's not a book of prophecy, I think people's belief in it as a book of prophecy can influence reality, and has definitely influenced reality in American foreign policy and in the formation of Israel. And right now, because of these types of beliefs and things like that, the world's in a very precarious position. And I also believe that cannabis was indeed the tree of life, not because of the book of Revelation, but because of its relationship with the goddess Asherah. And she's often depicted with a tree of life and associated with it. And we know her cult burned and used cannabis ritually, as well as made cloth from it, which has also been identified through archaeological evidence. They found a site where ritual cloth was created for one of Asherah's, under one of her various names in another region. And so it shows that this ritual cloth was being produced from hemp. They found hemp fibers and stuff like that in this thing with ritual weaving stations. So that's pretty clear, right? And she's identified continually with this tree of life. It's often depicted with two goats picking from it. And when you take a look at what happened with cannabis and Asherah and stuff like that, it seems very, very likely. And it's interesting because the Garden of Eden myth is actually placed at the beginning of the Bible, is thought to be one of the later things written in there. And many scholars believe that it's written to demonize the earlier situation of goddess worship, the use of sacred plants and stuff like that with the forbidden trees. And there's some good, strong evidence, and I lay all that out in my book, Cannabis, the Lost Sacrament. I go over what these different scholars have said about the book of Genesis in relation to the cult of Asherah. So because of that, and also in Assyrian text, there's many references to Cannabis, how it was an important part of the sacred rites and how it was used in the temple rites, and how much was offered, and the offerings records of supplies coming to the temple. It's listed in large amounts. So it was obviously through that, and often these sacred rites are depicting this sacred tree that's an unidentifiable botanically, but it's a stylized tree. And I think there's evidence that they were actually indicating cannabis with this stylized tree as well. So it's interesting that in this time, with all this stuff going on, there's also the time period here where we're rediscovering all these incredible uses for cannabis that could save the planet. You know, we could move away from fossil fuels with biofuels made from hemp. You know, we could move away from soil depleting cotton, which, you know, cotton contributed to the depression by turning large areas into a dust bowl. It just strips the soil of nutrients and stuff like that. And we could feed the world with a hemp seed, which can be produced abundantly. You know, and there's so many things that we could use this planet for, to change things around and do things. But we're just going in an opposite direction. You know, we're going to see a big expansion of oil here under the Trump administration in the midst of climate change crises like the hurricanes that have been rolling through the East Coast in recent months. And, you know, that's all seems to be set to intensify as well.
Yeah, with the renewed emphasis on
Drill.
petroleum. Yeah, exactly what I was going to say. You read my mind. But I know you and I both have been strong anti-Trumpers. I would say, even though you're Canadian, perhaps you were more public than I am. You know, here in America, I have, like, my sister is a Trumper.
Yeah.
So how can you can't cut off your sister, you know? So it's hard to deal with these people because they're you know, you can't call them stupid, but
yeah,
obviously,
it's toxic, man. You know, it's like toxicity. You know, I just find it toxic to be around. I can't tolerate it.
They've created this whole news system, you know, and it started out with Fox, and now there's Newsmax and all these sources, and now Elon Musk has Twitter or X, and it's all pushing this false information.
Yeah.
That and it's become predominant now, where it's actually picked up in the mainstream media. Even the Washington Post owner, Jeff Bezos of Amazon, would not allow their newsroom to endorse Harris.
Yeah. Well, Musk did things like he saw that Biden's tweets were getting more people seeing them than his, and he went in and had his people make sure that he was the top guy. If he tweeted anything, everybody'd see it, and he total misinformation and lies. And so Joe Rogan, you know, Joe Rogan was spreading stuff about Beyonce getting 10 million for a 3-minute talk. That was total bullshit, you know. And this is like huge influence.
Like eating cats and dogs.
Yeah.
It starts out as some tweet that some crazy person makes, and then they pick up on it and amplify it. You know, it's this whole right-wing media that has destroyed our country. You know, really.
Absolutely. And to be honest, I don't think it can be voted out now that the House, the Senate, and the Supreme Court are all MAGA. You know, it's just it's they get in on January, they're restructuring the whole system in a way that you'll never fix.
So as an American, it's my job to stop something like that from happening. And, you know, through political action, peaceful political action, that's my tool. And here's this show to talk about it, you know, another drop in the ocean or raindrop in the storm, you know. But I don't think it's permanent. I think we have to change it. I think that with the advent of artificial intelligence, nanotechnology, and the merging of those two, that we have a limited period to get those people out of there. So 2 years from now, we'll have another vote, and we'll see how that goes. You know,
good luck with that. You know, I guess I lost my hope in humanity at some point, you know, like a couple of years back. I think, you know, I had a retreat center going, and I felt like the whole plant medicine scene was getting infiltrated.
Yeah, I was hoping to come there. I never could swing it. I didn't have the funds after I went through this corporate takeover in 2016. And so fortunately, my situation's changed for the better here in the past few months. We won't go into those details, but if it was there now, I might be able to make it up there this year. But now Now you're over in Halifax.
Well, I'm up a couple hours away, but not too far from Halifax. Yeah, I moved here. I just said last time I was having fun when I was a surfer. I'm just going to retire and go surfing. That's what I've been doing. Yeah, it's. I don't think that there's a government in the world that is ready to make the changes with big oil and whatnot. That will address the climate change crisis, that's ready to make the adjustments in world politics to address the war and endless war that's going on, that could get elected. And I don't think, and it's the populace as much, as anybody, you know what I mean? It's the people. I don't think people would elect somebody that was pushing those agenda. Okay, we're going to actually tackle climate change. We're going to actually tackle this type of stuff. They're just not going to get elected, man. That's the reality. That's where people are at. Trump said clearly who he was. He promised things like the purge, like one day where we get to go and clean up everybody. He suggested things like using the army on leftist radicals, which in his mind includes people like Nancy Pelosi. He lied about immigrants eating cats and dogs, and having bad genes. Like that was like the type of stuff Hitler said about people being inherently evil through their bad genes, and having things like MMA style fights with refugees, they could win their freedom type of thing. This is what he suggested openly through the election, he calls climate change a China hoax, or a democratic hoax, the windmills are killing the birds and everything. And he lied after lie, and there's dangerous stuff. And people ate it right up, man. It's not about cheaper gas and eggs. It's about the bad things that he said. You can't ignore that stuff. And I don't believe people did ignore it to them. I think it appealed to them.
Yeah, for some of them, it definitely did. I won't go into the details, but yeah, it's scary. I am just an optimist by nature, perhaps. I didn't believe that he could possibly get elected again. I can't understand how someone can vote for him, given his background and all the hundreds of different things, from ripping off all of his business associates to saying he rapes and sexually grabs women by their genitals. I'll say, even though we do have a disclaimer, I just don't see how it can happen, but it has now for a second time, and he got an even bigger percentage of the vote. I guess his vote did drop below 50%, and they keep counting votes in various states. So
votes don't matter as much as the electoral college there, and by electoral college standards.
So we gotta
abolish
the electoral college. We need a whole new constitutional convention. I mean, back in 1789 and 87, when this thing was written and enacted, the Constitution, it was cutting edge then, but now it's the thing written by old rich slave owners, and it needs to be revised and completely updated. And maybe Trump will push that. Some of my activist friends, one of them, you don't remember this guy, John Walsh. He was one of our biggest petitioners. He died in 2016, but he was saying before Trump was elected that Trump will cause everyone to come out and protest, and that will change things. Well, that didn't really happen in Trump's first term, but it's possible that we can see some things this time around. But change is very difficult. Peaceful change, in particular, is a very slow process. When I first got involved in marijuana legalization back when I was a teenager in the 1970s, I had no idea that it wasn't going to happen until I was almost 60, and that I'd still be working at it now after I'm 60. But here it is, 50 years later, and things are changing so quickly, and the change is accelerating. So it makes it more and more urgent as time goes by. And the thing is, we just got to wipe out that right-wing media that's misleading so many different people, and that economic stranglehold they have over the world.
Yeah, yeah. Well, it's just gotten a lot stronger, I can't imagine power somebody like Elon Musk has now after that. He's already talking about messing with other elections. Here in Canada, he's been mentioning Brazil. He's been mentioning a quote from Elon Musk is, "We will coup whoever we want to coup, deal with it." And that's the reality is what they're doing is they're undermining of national security around the globe.
I know. It's scary. So all we can do is speak the truth to power
Yeah.
and hope they don't come shoot us. You know, they took me out financially once. We'll see what happens next time around. Just in closing, I want to go back to that verse that I had not heard until my wife is a very devout Seventh-day Adventist. So she's constantly reading the Bible, and she found this quote. And I'd like you to look into it. It is Isaiah 4 and 5. And I've got the whole thing here now, so I'm going to read. It says, Isaiah 4. For so the Lord said unto me, I will take my rest, and I will consider in my dwelling place like a clear heat upon herbs, and like a cloud of dew in the heat of harvest. For afore the harvest, when the bud is perfect, and the sour grape is ripening in the flower, he shall both cut off the sprigs with pruning hooks, and take away and cut down the branches. So the whole thing about sour grape in the flower sounds like cannabis to me.
Yeah,
But
well, that's one interpretation, and cannabis infused wines too were known then. I like the reference in Isaiah, this one here in Isaiah 6, and it is then through one of the seraphim. Woe to me! Okay, it starts in Isaiah 4 actually. At the sound of their voices, the doorposts and threshold shook, and the temple was filled with smoke. Woe to me, I cried, I am ruined, for I am a man of unclean lips, and I live among a people of unclean lips, and my eyes have seen the King, Lord Almighty. Then one of the seraphims flew unto me with a live coal in hand, which he had taken with tongs from off the altar, which it touched to my mouth, and said, See, this has touched your lips. Your guilt is taken away, and your sin atoned for. Then I heard the voice saying, Whom shall I send? So he's describing a scene in the temple, and this fits with the temple offerings that we saw at Telerad. And the angel goes over to the altar, and he grabs with tongs a burning coal, and he holds it up to Isaiah's mouth, and Isaiah takes a hit, and his sins and iniquity are taken away. And this fits with the other reference to Isaiah, where I mentioned the cannabis and frankincense, because in that reference as well, God saying, but you've burdened me with your sins and iniquity. And so in one, he hits the smoke, and the sins and iniquity are lifted, and God's going, you want me to take away your sins and iniquity, but you haven't brought me any canna and frankincense. So they're kind of connected by that term there.
yeah, we are out of time here. I guess we're down to our last minute. One thing that I'd like to point out, we lost a couple of marijuana elections here in the United States. Both South Dakota and North Dakota voted marijuana down. So I think this is a time that all cannabis aware people should no longer name your children Dakota, because this name has been shamed by South and North Dakota voting against cannabis legalization. There's a little joke in party. So I've been talking with Chris Bennett, who is the author of Cannabis, The Last Sacrament, and several other books. Go out there and check out his books. Is there anything you want to say in closing, Chris?
Good luck out there. I hope you make it through this time of trials and tribulations.
Me too. Thank you, sir. Keep working at it and help restore hemp.
You bet. Take care, brother. Always a blessing.